Good morning, Mrs. Thomas coming at you guys, 10th grade English with a tutorial about reading. Reading either short stories or articles related to Of Mice and Men, which we read earlier this year. So this is a supplemental activity. It is not graded, but I can provide you with feedback. I'm also going to have two options, one where you continue with me on the lesson and the other where you pick your own option and complete it yourself. So my hope is that this is something that can keep you going and hopefully give you a little bit more structure, and it will help you also comply with what the districts put on the website for distance learning. So I'm going to share my screen with you for the rest of the time, so you'll see my picture really small, talking to you the whole time. And I'm going to show you what I would do and just take you through the lesson. So we're at the district website, so you can always pause this video if you need to be able to figure things out and where you need to be. So this is just the district website. So I'm going to navigate it. I really don't go through this way. I go through it with the links that are sent through email. So it's going to be interesting where it's at. I didn't practice beforehand because I wanted to approach this just like you would. So I just scroll down because I don't see anything about learning or the distance education. But I do see something here about it because I see the thing about free meals and updates. I see online learning supports available for elementary, inclusive education, and secondary students. Well, you guys are secondary, so we're going to click that. It takes a second for it to come up. This is like the older thing, like I talked about in my video earlier this week. If you didn't catch that one, I talked about how this is kind of was part of phase, I think, 2 of the plan. We're now on phase 3. I know that's not always clear with the district stuff, so just keep that in mind that this is kind of the phase 2 stuff, which is very general. And then phase 3 that we're currently in is more of these learning packets. So on these learning packets, you can see elementary and secondary. Secondary, they didn't print yours off. It is all electronic. We come over to high school English language arts choice menu. The lesson that I'm going to do with you guys today happens to be the Actively Learn lesson. So if you go to box 4, you can see that here. It says participate in an Actively Learn lesson. See suggestions below for appropriate grade level activity. You'll be focusing on one topic and 3 activities related to the topic of your choice. So I'm going to scroll down. You go past the actual board, which is the boxes. And that's for box 1. We're on box 4, which is Actively Learn. Actively Learn we have used for the district pre and post assessments. So just be aware of that. It's nothing new. So this is what we need to access. What I don't like is they don't have the link here. We have to go to the search bar and type in Of Mice and Men. Okay, so I'm going to show you as much as I can show of the login. I can't show you everything because it's going to have my login and we don't need you going there. So it doesn't even have the link for Actively Learn here. That's nice. Why couldn't you just put in the URL? I don't know, but I'm going to show you that. So open a new tab like I am, and we're going to just type in www.actively. It's probably in the frequently used links from the district. So let's go there and see if it's there as well. So if I go to frequently used links on their website, it's usually over here on the left. Sorry, it was right there when I got there. Frequently used links. It should be under student tools. And I don't see Actively Learn there. So that's really nice. It's over here, online resources. There we go. So sometimes they put things in places that I know they're trying to categorize things, but sometimes it's not that helpful. All right, so you don't need to create an account or sign up. You already have one with the district. So let me move my little face, not little. We're gonna go sign in, top right hand corner. And I'm gonna close out that other one that I opened separately. Log in with Clever. This might seem familiar now, Clever. If you're on your school laptop, it should like automatically recognize you. If not, you're going to use the same email and password you use or login information that you use on your laptop. So remember that it's your sn@kent.k12.wa.us. But if you're on your school laptop, it should automatically recognize you and bring you to this screen with the login with Active Directory. If it doesn't, just put in your school stuff. It might ask you what your school name is. So you might have to tell it that it's Kent School District 415, okay? My username and password. So here I am. Mine looks a little bit different because I am a teacher. So just keep that in mind that we're on teacher mode here. So, but you should still have most of these main things. I wish they had a thing where it was like view as a student. Like that's what Canvas does. It gives me that option to view it the way you guys see it, so I can actually show you what my Canvas page looks like from your perspective. But I'm gonna go up here to the search. You should have a search somewhere, so find it. Okay, search of mice and men. Well, look, it's right there. I picked this one because we read this earlier this year. Even those that are new to class and haven't read it, you should still be able to find some interesting stories or articles here. So that's the actual book, and it costs money. See, it has a dollar sign. That means it costs money. I need a licensing for it. So when you're like, oh, why doesn't my teacher use the online sources? Because they cost money. They seem free, but they're not. So that's not what we want. That's the main text. That's the actual book. So we scroll down, and here's some nonfiction. If you want to read, I assigned this one to you guys when I was absent one day to read about the author. So if that doesn't look familiar, it's because you didn't do what you're supposed to do when I was gone, okay? So if you've never read that, read it now. This one, Is the American Dream Dead? It's all about the American dream because that's one big theme of Mice and Men. I'm gonna move my big face again. I'm gonna go back. The importance of historic context and analysis and interpretation. That one just doesn't sound that interesting to me right now. I'm wanting something that really connects to me and my life and the world around me. So I'm gonna keep looking. Intellectual and developmental disabilities. Oh, if I want to learn a lot more about that and what disabilities are, I know quite a bit about that though. As a teacher, as a mom, if you guys don't remember, I also grew up with two cousins who have developmental and intellectual disabilities. I have one cousin who has Down syndrome, and I have another cousin who, it's all unclear because she was born with her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck. But she also has a form of cerebral palsy, and I think it was caused by that loss of oxygen to her brain. So anyway, that's my cousin Debbie. All right, so that one I'm not going to read because I already know quite a bit about that with my trainings as a teacher and also my personal experiences. So I'm going to keep going. If assisted dying is legalized, who gets to decide whose life is worth living? Wow, that's interesting. And I like going into arguments. I like reading about those types of philosophical questions of, is it moral for us to decide who should live and who should die and in what circumstances? So that one's kind of on my radar. What are the effects of, how America's Got Talent contestant Cody Lee shattered stereotypes about disability. I watched some of the videos of him performing, and he's autistic and amazing pianist and singer. So I might be interested in that one. It's 2 pages long. That's not too bad. Images of mourning and the power of acknowledging grief. So that deals with grief. I don't really feel like going into that right now. I'm not in a place for that. Some of you might be. You might be dealing with your own grief and you might want to look at that. I really don't feel like that. This one. Child migrants around the world are being denied their human rights. Oh, I see how that connects. Of Mice and Men, those were migrant workers. They were migrant white workers, but they're still migrant workers. Now, granted, some of the migrant workers today deal with far more issues than what the characters of Mice and Men dealt with, dealing with issues of racism and xenophobia and things like that. But that's dealing with child migrants, which is really interesting. And it's around the world. So it might be some things I'm unaware of in the world. So I might want to read that. This one, Good Intentions and Poor Results, John Steinbeck's Lessons on Humanitarian Aid. That's really interesting because right now we're dealing with humanitarian aid being needed because of the COVID crisis. So even though this might not be a current article, I like that it kind of relates John Steinbeck's ideas to this concept that we can relate to today. So that's really interesting to me. So I hope you guys are seeing how I'm processing through the choices I have. And I am thinking of what really speaks to me. This one, The Danger of a Single Story, I love, love, love this. I've used her video, her TED Talk in class before. I usually use it with narrative and the idea of how if we only hear one person's story or one side of it, how that's a problem. So I'm going to click on that one. It's the actual video. I think this one is really cool. So it has the text of the speech too, so you can follow along as you watch the video. And what's really cool here in Actively Learn is that some of the terms that they think, now this isn't me, I didn't leave this, it's whoever wrote the lesson, it's just gonna say it's Mrs. Thomas did it. It gives me credit where I don't really deserve it. But this teacher who created the lesson and tied it to Of Mice and Men highlighted some terms they thought students would have issues with, like they might not know, like raffia, if you don't know what raffia is. And sometimes they're cultural words, like just materials or foods or whatever, like ginger beer. You may not know what ginger beer is. So you can read through it, and it has questions embedded throughout for you to answer. Now mine, it's showing the answer, so don't cheat. Don't cheat. Because I'm the teacher, I can see all of the answers. So you could do that and answer the questions and try that out. All right, that's all the nonfiction. So articles that relate. And I think the strongest ones for me right now are the one about Cody Lee and this Good Intentions one. Child migrant one, that's interesting too though. And ooh, this one about losing a dog can be harder than losing a relative or friend. I know that some of you have lost a dog this year or very recently, and a lot of people treat it like it's not a big deal, and they don't realize how much that affects us. So if that's something you're ready to deal with, look at that one. And then of course, Danger of a Single Story, I love that one, but I've done that one before in class. Then it has a section of short stories and then also some videos. It has a one about the Great Depression. We already kind of learned about that with Of Mice and Men, so I'm staying away from that one. All right, short stories. The Scarlet Ibis you may have read in 9th grade. That's a pretty common one for 9th grade. For those of you really liking our dystopian literature, I would recommend 10 with a Flag. It's a short story I thought about having us read, but because school was canceled, I didn't get a chance to do that. So I think we might actually read that one here in a minute for those that want to stick around with me and do the lesson with me. So The Coal is another good one. That's another dystopian. So it looks like they have a lot of dystopias in here. Part of that is because a lot of the issues dealt with in Of Mice and Men deal with like what's the right choice, or people who are different or go against the norm. So I think that's why. The Velveteen Rabbit, I don't know enough about the Velveteen Rabbit to be able to make a guess about that, how it fits. But I can like hover over these and it will tell me like the topics involved, and I could figure that out. So here's your job. Your job is to pick a story or an article to read and answer the questions to just do it. If you have problems with accessing it, please let me know. Just send me a quick email. I'm trying this out for the first time with you guys since we've been in school, but we've used these before. So I am going to click on this one and actually assign it to you guys, hoping that you'll be able to access it even easier if the rest of them do not work. So I'm going to actually assign this to you guys. You don't have to do this one. You can do any of them that you want, but I'm going to do that so that one's easy for you guys to find, called 10 with a Flag. And if you're wanting to do your own choice of what you wanted to read from this list, go ahead and go do that right now. For the rest of you that want to stay, I'm just going to read the story aloud with you. I'm not going to answer the questions. I'm going to let you do that, but I'm going to do a read aloud and maybe stop and give my own reactions along the way. So if you want to stick around, stick around. If not, you can go and do your own thing. So here's the story, 10 with a Flag. You open it. This is what you are left with. I'm going to try to see if there's a way to change this a bit. You guys know you can change your color and font and stuff and the font size. I really like that. I do this one. Open Dyslexic. I've heard different things about it. It's supposed to be a new font that's good for a lot of people with the dyslexia where they see different letters and stuff. There's so many forms of dyslexia though, so it's not going to work for everybody. Okay, I want the paragraph numbering on so I can actually know the number. So you can change these settings on your own computer, but this is what I'm going to use for our read. Okay, it says before reading, review the pre-reading poll question results. What are students, okay, this is telling me what to do. So it's giving me some things. So I'm just gonna focus over here. This is like my teacher side. So I'm wondering if there's a way I can get rid of that. Oh my gosh, this is annoying. No, I want to just do assign. See how it's doing that assignment versions? I just wanted to just, I don't know what that's going to do. Oh, I don't want to duplicate. See, Mrs. Thomas makes mistakes too. I was hoping I could just see the text, but apparently it's not going to do that. Oh, there it goes. Yes, I knew there was a way. All right. I've actually not read this story. It's one that another teacher told me about and said it was really good. And so it's one of these stories I had like in my back pocket that I was thinking about doing. So I know the basic idea, but I haven't read the actual story. So I hope my facial expressions aren't too annoying. It says, as you read, ask yourself, how much control do the characters ultimately have? You know, when I'm given something like that, I might be like, you know, how much control do I have right now? I mean, I'm thinking of all this COVID stuff and I'm like, do I really have that much control? It doesn't feel like it. I mean, I have control over my attitude. I have control over my day-to-day like routine a little bit. I mean, I have office hours I have to keep for my job. I also have to keep my kids going on their schoolwork, which is hard to balance. And I know some of you have more choice than others. And that's really hard and when you don't feel like you have a lot of control. And it makes people very frustrated and scared, and we all respond differently. So I'm already interested in what the assignment directions say because I just like to wonder things because I'm weird like that. All right, extra help text summary. Johnny and his wife are having a baby. The baby's test results have come back flagged with some concerns. Johnny and his wife try to make the best choice based on that information. Test results. Okay, I know when someone's pregnant, they, you know, have tests done on the baby to make sure they're safe, or they can choose to do that. How do you feel about computer-driven cars? Okay, so it switched gears. So it had the extra text help text summary. Question 1 is a poll. How do you feel about computer-driven cars? Go ahead and answer that. That sounds fun and cool. That sounds dangerous. I'd still be worried about accidents with a computer driving. I'd try one if I was assured they were safe. I would never ride in a computer-driven car. Go ahead and do your answer. I'm not going to answer, so I don't want to sway your ideas. I have ideas about all of these, but that's because I'm somebody that loves to read and watch a lot of science fiction. All right, now that you have your choice, we're going to read the story, 10 with a Flag by Joseph Paul Haynes. Johnny didn't talk while he was driving. Normally it would drive me a little crazy, sitting there in traffic and not saying a word, but this time it didn't bother me. There was too much on my mind. Truth was, I hoped he wouldn't talk so that I could have some time to think. And when he pulled onto the freeway, I knew I wasn't going to get that lucky. It only took him a couple of seconds to connect to the traffic web. Johnny didn't like being out of control. It was one of the things I'd found endearing in him, quaint even. This time, though, he didn't even double check the connection. The steering wheel folded and collapsed into the dash, and he turned to face me. What does that mean exactly? He asked. Did the doctor say anything else? I shook my head. He said he'd have to check, but he'd never heard of the combination coming up before. He'd have to check? Yeah. Did he say anything else? I told you he said he'd have to check. I didn't know what to say. It was still sinking in. Johnny leaned back in his seat and stared out his window. I could tell he was getting ready to turn around and go back. We'd only been married 3 years. I could read some of his expressions like a book. How's that even possible? He asked. I mean, is the baby okay? Baby is fine. Now I wish we didn't know. I turned away from him. You agreed we should get the test done. I know, but damn. Don't you think it's better knowing? How do you get a 10 and a flag? He asked. He said he'd have to check. Oh, sorry. He said he'd have to check, I repeated. But the baby's fine? Yes. And you sure he said 10? I nodded. 10. Johnny crossed his arms and chewed on his bottom lip. I think he mumbled something, but at that point, I didn't want to hear it. All right, so here they answer a question. What are Johnny and the narrator concerned about? Oh my gosh, I just showed the answer. All right, hopefully I scrolled fast enough. Keep going. We didn't talk for a while after that. I was contented to sit and watch the other transports as we cut in and out of traffic. It was like watching a school of fish swimming together, weaving at the same time. We rushed along at speeds of over 200 kilometers with no more than a meter separating our vehicles, our safety in the control of the central traffic computer. Sometimes it was easier to let something bigger than yourself take control. It had a plan, and although you couldn't always see it, you knew you'd never wreck. It wasn't until we sped past our off-ramp that I began to get concerned. Where are we going? I asked. Johnny didn't answer. He punched up the navigation screen and sighed. What the hell? What? We've been redirected. We have an appointment with Human Services. Now? Now? Yeah, they've even rescheduled my work shift from this afternoon and notified the office. Do you think it's about the test results? I had expected some reaction from Human Services, just not this quick. I folded my hands in my lap to keep from tapping my fingers. Johnny didn't like to see me get nervous. It doesn't say. Great. There was nothing else to do but sit back and enjoy the ride. We were just passengers. Central had control. Scroll past the... this little hashtag thing is just indicating like a break in the text, like a change in scene. Some authors do that. They'll do it with like little asterisks. Those are little star looking things. Some will just do extra space between paragraphs. So that's a very natural place to stop and ask you a question to help guide your understanding of what you're reading. Okay, so far I'm thinking about this story as like, okay, husband and wife, they've been married 3 years. They're in the car. The car has a computerized system that they program for where it's kind of cool. Kind of scary if the wrong people get control of it. Like we see with them, they were going somewhere and now suddenly they're being taken to Human Services and their stuff's been canceled. Their plans have changed because some authority decided to do that. So that's interesting. All right, so we'll keep going. I wonder what's going to happen to them. But there's some tests they did with the baby that sounds like it was optional. And because they're like, would we have wanted to know or not? And maybe we shouldn't have done the test. Okay, and there's a flag and a 10. That's weird. I want to know what that's all about. All right. I understand you must be apprehensive, the agent said. All right, so I can already tell we've switched scenes because of that hashtag I mentioned, but also with this agent. So I know they're in a new setting, probably at the Human Services, and it's an agent who works for Human Services. I can infer that based off what's going on, okay? All right, I'll start again. I understand you must be apprehensive, the agent said. He was a small man, this Mr. White, and the huge empty desk he sat behind made him look even smaller. Results like these can cause a great deal of confusion. Johnny started to say something. I squeezed his hand before he could. The last thing we needed was to anger a government official, particularly one as high up as Mr. White seemed to be. It was best to remain compliant until he finished. The important thing to remember is that your baby rated a 10. Your child will be an asset to the nation. Only 1 in 50,000 couples who go through the procedure come up with these results. It's a credit to the two of you as citizens. As such, the state has raised both your rating to 8, effective immediately. Congratulations. Johnny and I stared at each other. 8s? That was 2 levels higher than our current rating. 8 meant 10 hours of work as opposed to 40. 8 meant no more scraping by between allowance periods. 8 meant a much bigger apartment. 8 meant no more late nights while Johnny stayed at work to improve his production numbers. 8 meant no more looking over our shoulders. Thank you, Mr. White. But of course, Johnny couldn't keep his mouth shut. I've just one question though. The flag, how can there be a flag with a rating of 10? Okay, we're gonna pause there because there's a lot of information about their world here. If I go back, we know there's a rating system for the citizens, right? So the kid's been flagged a 10, which means it sounds like the higher you go up, the better for your life, because they said they used to be a 6 because they said that they're going to be moved up 2 slots from, they're currently below that, they were a 6, and now they're going to be bumped up to an 8, which has its advantages. They only have to work 10 hours a week instead of 40. I mean, so it sounds like a much better life. And a 10 is pretty rare. 1 in 50,000 couples have a kid that's a 10. So it's going to up their rating to have a kid that's rated so high. So this kid's special somehow. So that's interesting that they get that because of their kid. And they talk about what being an 8 means. No more scraping between allowance periods. So allowance period sounds like when they're given money, and it sounds like they're not really given enough to get by. I mean, they barely get by with it. A bigger apartment, no more late nights while Johnny stayed at work to improve his production numbers. So life's going to be way nicer for them. But then, of course, Johnny has to open up his mouth, which our narrator is the wife, and she sounds like she's like, oh, great, he opened his mouth again. So now he's asking the question, how can there be a flag with a rating of 10? So a flag to me sounds like a negative. Like when something's flagged, like in a factory, when you flag something, it's usually because there's a problem with it. And so you flag it so it can get checked. Okay, so I'm already thinking of that. And we already know flags get our attention, right? So we can think about that, like when someone waves a flag to get your attention. Think of a construction worker that does that sometimes. Okay. All right, let's keep reading. Mr. White pursed his lips. It was quite an odd gesture, almost feminine, and I had to keep myself from giggling. 8 didn't mean you could just randomly disrespect government officials. Well, he said, there is that question. To be perfectly honest, I've never seen it come up before, but in your case, I don't think it's something to worry about. Your child rated a 10 and you are now 8. I don't see how there could be a problem. The government won't, of course, stand in the way if you decide to invoke your option. What if we do? Johnny asked. I squeezed his hand tighter, but he just pulled his away from my grasp and continued. What would happen to us? Mr. White smiled. There was little humor in it. Happen, sir? If we use the option to terminate the pregnancy, what would happen to us? Why would you do that, sir? Your child is a 10. He or she will be a great credit to the nation and improve life for all of the citizenry. What citizen would even consider that? Johnny shook his head. Well, the flag. I'm worried about it. Worried about it? Mr. White picked up his pen and scribbled something on his tablet. Yes, Johnny answered. Your child is a 10, sir, Mr. White repeated. That should be enough to make you forget about the flag. Well, it doesn't. It certainly didn't keep Central from issuing the flag. Why would they have issued a flag unless there was some concern? Mr. White tapped his pen on his desk a few times and leaned forward. How much do you know about the CDP test? Central looks into the future and determines the baby's community viability, Johnny said. That's really all there is to it, right? Mr. White chuckled. Well, that's not really accurate. Central can't look into the future. That's impossible, he said, chuckling. What it does do is predict the future based off of the child's cellular past, the parent's cellular past, and other environmental factors. You see, once you can witness the cellular history of an individual, you can predict future activity through sheer computational power. Central has an over 99% success rate with this test. We don't question the results. I knew Johnny wasn't going to take the hints, so I cut him off before he could do more damage. It's just so confusing, Mr. White, I said, smiling as wide as I could. Aren't flags usually reserved for children with, well, problems? Actually, he said, the flag is just an indication that the parents will have to make a sacrifice. Sometimes it means that the child will be handicapped, and the parents will have to work additional hours to make up for this extra burden on the state. All we know is that when a flag comes up, the sacrifice necessary from the parents is sufficient to warrant giving them the option to terminate the pregnancy. It's how we protect your freedoms as individuals. The state values that highly. He smiled. All right, pause because there is a question about why are Johnny and the narrator having trouble understanding the flag. Okay, they're told that this is, they get a flag, and the guy that's the government official explains how we know there's a sacrifice that comes with some, like they sometimes have problems, and so we want you to make an informed decision. So we know in their world, it's acceptable to terminate the pregnancies due to having issues with the pregnancy, which does happen today in our world. All right, so make sure you answer that and we'll continue. But our child is a 10, I said. 10s can't be a burden on the state by definition. They are the ones that make the state better. That's true, which is why I'm not overly concerned with the flag, and neither should you. Your child will be an asset to the state. You'll have to make a sacrifice, but what parent doesn't? I knew I had to phrase my next question carefully. And there's no indication as to what form that sacrifice might take? You know I can't answer that, Mr. White said. And you know you shouldn't even be asking. Knowledge of the results can affect their outcome. I see. Well, thank you. You didn't answer my question, Johnny said. What happens if we take the flag option? Mr. White fidgeted in his chair. Well, your promotion will be canceled for one thing. He grabbed a folder from the stack of papers and flipped it open. You're a 6 now, correct? Johnny nodded. Mr. White said, flipping through pages. Did you know that your boss had put in for a rate reduction? Excuse me? Johnny leaned forward in his seat. I could see his cheeks turning red. I work harder than... Says here, Mr. White interjected, that your boss seems to think that although you spend 50 hours a week on the job, your production levels only account for 30 hours worth of work. He recommended you be downgraded to a 5 so that you can actually accomplish 40 hours worth of work in 60 hours time. That's not right. I work harder than... But you don't have to worry about that anymore, Mr. White said, smiling wider. You've been promoted to an 8. Johnny's mouth hung open. It was time to get out of there. Thank you, Mr. White. We both appreciate your time. Johnny was still dazed by the time we got back to the transport. It didn't help matters any that it wasn't the same one we had left in the parking garage. It was bigger, longer. It was a transport belonging to a couple of 8s. There was no driver's seat. Central had control. A demotion? Johnny said. I can't believe that. No, I said, nodding toward the speaker panel on the dashboard. A promotion. What great luck. Doubt gnawed at my insides, but this wasn't the place to discuss it. We sat quietly while Central directed the car onto the freeway. Once again, we passed our off-ramp without slowing. I'm gonna pause here because there's some stuff the narrator's letting you in on, is that why isn't she wanting to discuss it here? Well, she nodded toward the speaker panel on the dashboard, so she's obviously paranoid that someone's listening in on this from the powers that be. I'm not sure if Johnny is completely aware of that or not. He seems all caught up in emotion. All right. Central, Johnny said. List destination. The soft voice of Central Command filled the cabin. Your new residence, sir. New residence, of course. You have 18 voice messages, sir, all offering congratulations on your promotion and the impending boon to the nation that your son's birth will deliver. Would you like to hear them? So it was a boy. Neither of us felt much like celebrating. Not now, Central, I said. Just take us home. So one thing to think about is like, how would you feel if you were an expectant parent and you got news that your child would benefit society, but also that they might have different disabilities or special needs that would come along with that? What would you decide? And for some of you, that answer is very easy, and for some of you, that's more complicated. All right, so here's another one of those breaks, the hashtag. All right, we'll keep going. So we know it's a change in scene or time. We'd managed to go a full week without appearing in public. The raise meant Johnny could work from home, so we didn't have to go out if we didn't want. But we both knew we'd stay hidden as long as we could. I'd convinced Johnny to show our faces at the opera. I'd never been to the opera. It was one of the perks of the promotion, and I was looking forward to the evening. But even that had been a struggle. Since we'd come home from human services, he'd spent all his free time in front of the computer. He wouldn't even discuss the test results with me. My wardrobe had picked out a deep blue chiffon evening gown for me. I dressed in front of the full-length mirror, and once I was ready, lights dimmed while the environmental controls chose the scent of roses to fill the room. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt relaxed. A night out would do us good. I only hoped Johnny would be in a similar mood. Instead, I found Johnny still sitting in front of the computer. He hadn't yet started to get ready. We'll be late, I said. He glanced my direction and did a double take. You look beautiful. I crossed one ankle over the other, dipped my chin, and looked up at him. Then get up, get dressed, and take me on a date. He sighed, took a deep breath, and said, I do so very love you, you know. Then get dressed. He pushed himself away from the desk and walked toward his dressing room. And don't even try, I called after him, to pick something out yourself. Just wear what your wardrobe chooses. You'd never match this color if you had all night. I'm not completely useless. Oh, honey, I know that, I said, smiling as sweetly as possible. You're only useless when trying to dress yourself. Now hurry up. We made it out the door on time. Our new transport was nowhere to be seen. An older model pulled up in front of our building. I requested a downgrade for the evening, Johnny said. I felt like driving. I shook my head. As long as you get us there on time. He held my door open and closed it behind me. I waited until we left the parking lot and slid my hand onto his leg. It was good to be out again. Even though the new apartment had plenty of room, it just felt great to get out from behind the walls, to get back into the world again. Once we turned onto the surface streets, Johnny engaged the auto drive and leaned back in his seat. I thought you said you wanted to drive. I lied. I just wanted to talk to you without a speaker. My good mood evaporated. We have to do this now. Did you know, he asked without acknowledging my question, that in the 4 cases where a mother has died in childbirth over the last 10 years, the flag option had been available in every case? My stomach. So? That doesn't mean... No, it doesn't mean... So why are you bringing this up? I asked. Don't you think I'm frightened enough already? Johnny leaned closer to me. But it doesn't mean it isn't possible either. We've got to consider it. It would also mean that our son will have a learning disability and will have to work particularly hard to get him through it. My cheeks were burning. I understood his concern, but I couldn't believe he was going to ruin our first night out together in ages. He crossed his arms. And it could mean you're in danger. How are we supposed to know? Who's to say the child actually needs us to be a 10? We can't know. Knowledge of future events can change the outcome. He's a 10. That's all that's important. Bull! My jaw dropped. That's not all that's important by a long shot. Of course it is. Instinct made me look around to see that no one was in the car with us. You don't interfere with something like that. It's almost treasonous. Of course it isn't treasonous. The state wouldn't have given us the flag otherwise. It's our right. My eyes filled with tears. But he's going to be a 10. He's going to be a perfect little boy. Yes, he will, Johnny replied, taking my hand in his. He brushed a tear from my cheek and added, but perfect for who? I knew we weren't going to the opera even before we sped past the turnoff to the cultural district, but it didn't get any easier once we were sitting inside Dr. Jones's office waiting for him to finish his examination. Well, he said, looking down at me from over the edge of his bifocals, there's no genetic contraindicators, no signs of pretoxemia, no anemia, nothing that would give me even a moment's hesitation about your health or that of your child. He seemed tired, and his thin gray hair puffed up more on one side of his head than the other. Johnny ran his fingers through his hair. I just don't get it. Maybe it's not for us to get, I offered. But there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not in any danger, so we can stop worrying. That doesn't mean that something couldn't show up later, though, right? Johnny, Nothing is certain, sir, Dr. Jones replied. Johnny! I grabbed his wrist and clamped down. He whipped his head around to look at me, and that's when I finally saw it. He was terrified. Sweat beaded his upper lip, and he couldn't keep his eyes on any one thing. But it's still your choice, Dr. Jones said. No one is going to stop you from choosing to exercise your option. The flag is there for a purpose. I stared Johnny in the eye, hoping he'd notice the slight side-to-side shake I was giving him. I think we should use the flag, he said. My skin froze. No, I whispered. There will be other babies, he said. Ones without a flag. We don't need the raises. I can't stand the thought of losing you. Tell her she can have other babies, doctor. Of course you can have other babies, Dr. Jones said. But let's not overlook... Why would we have to make a sacrifice, Johnny asked, kneeling down in front of me. We've been given the option. There wouldn't be a flag if there wasn't a problem. You know that. I tried to speak, but nothing came out of my mouth. He was right. There was something wrong, some kind of difficulty. We'd have to face it if we had this baby. Difficulties we most likely wouldn't have to face with another baby. But this one was a 10. He could be a great composer or an artist. He could discover medicine that cured the last remaining diseases. He could do anything. I knew that, felt it with every beat of my heart. The state knew that too. But what was the cost? I looked at Johnny and felt very cold. Can't make this decision, I said. I pulled him in close and rested my cheek against his and whispered in his ear, "You make it. Make it for both of us." He kissed my temple, then my cheek, then my ear. His warm breath caught in his throat. He pulled away, turned to Dr. Jones, and said, "We'll take the option." What little air remained in my chest rushed out of me. The room spun. "Very well," Dr. Jones said. He removed a gown from a drawer beneath the examination table and handed it to me. "I'll give you a moment to get ready," he said, and left the room. We didn't talk. I changed into the dressing gown and sat back up on the table. The longer we sat, waiting, the smaller the room seemed to get. I wanted Johnny to say something, anything, but he just sat there trying his best to smile when I looked at him. After a few minutes, Dr. Jones rejoined us. He wasn't alone. Mr. White from Human Services stood in the doorway, flanked by a half-dozen constables. "That will be all, Doctor." Johnny stepped in front of me. "What are you doing? This is our decision." "And you made it," Mr. White said. He appeared even smaller out from behind his desk. Johnny shook his head and held his arms to the side, trying in vain to shield me from the constables. "You said you wouldn't interfere." Mr. White smiled. "We didn't. We allow you to make your decision of your own free will." He stepped inside the door and removed his stun gun from behind his back. "No one ever said we'd let you go through with it, though. The flag is an option, not a right. Arrest him." The constables fell on him then. Johnny tried to resist, but one kick in the stomach was all it took to end that. Within 10 seconds, they had him out of the room, leaving only myself and Mr. White. "Go ahead and get changed," he said. "I'll wait for you outside." I dressed slowly. It was as if every memory I had of Johnny came back to me right then. The dates, our wedding, the fights, the makeups, all of it. I just stood there and let them take him. I wanted to cry, but held it back. Whatever happened to us, I'd be strong. I pulled my shoulders back and opened the door. Mr. White was waiting for me. He was still alone. "We understand this wasn't your choice. That's correct, isn't it?" My flesh raised with a sudden chill. "That's right." "Good," he said, lips drawn tight and thin with his smile. "What's going to happen to Johnny?" Mr. White offered me his hand and helped me step down from the examination table. "He'll be reduced to a 1 or 2, of course, put to manual labor. If he keeps himself clean, he could even work back up to a 4 or 5. I knew Johnny wouldn't want me to live that way. "Of course, your marriage is annulled. You're free to choose whomever you'd like to replace him from the other 8s or 9s. "Replace him?" Mr. White grimaced. "I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'm not terribly good with certain social graces. Please forgive me. Of course, you'll want to take some time to yourself, but when you're ready, choose who you will." By the time we walked outside, the constables had Johnny packed into a separate transport and were pulling out into traffic. I watched them drive away, wondering if I'd ever see him again. Either way, I knew he'd want me to take care of our baby. "Mr. White," I asked, my senses beginning to return, "can you tell me anything about the flag? It seems like I deserve to know something." "What flag, dear?" "The flag on my baby, of course." "There is no flag on your baby. You made your sacrifice, just as Central predicted you would." "You mean?" Mr. White chuckled. "Of course we knew what your husband would do. Central is over 99% accurate, remember? We don't question its results." My transport pulled up to the curb and Mr. White helped me inside. "Central," he said. "Take the lady home. She's had a hard night." "Mr. White," I asked, "one last thing?" He folded his hands in front of him. "Yes?" "My baby. Can you give me any hint about what makes him so important?" Mr. White glanced over his shoulder, then leaned into the car. "I can't be specific. You know that, right?" "Of course." "Let's just say that I wouldn't be surprised to see him in Human Services." That I hadn't expected. Human Services? "Well, look at it this way, dear. He's already uncovered one traitor to the state, and he hasn't even been born yet." He then leaned back with that tight, thin smile still stretched across his face and slammed shut the door. The transport sped away, whisking me home. There was no driver. Central was in control. All right, so that's the end of the story. Pretty messed up. You can think of how the characters were played in this. The wife, who's our narrator, who isn't named, but her husband, Johnny, and they kind of knew what Johnny would do in the end anyway. And so answer your questions. Hopefully that helped to have me read it aloud to you. You can go back and reread any sections and just do your best at answering the questions. Keep those reading and analysis skills up, and I hope to see you guys again soon with another tutorial, another lesson, or at least something where I can help you engage more with the text that you read. Bye guys, have a good one. Whoops, I gotta stop sharing first, huh? All right, sorry. Now I will see you guys later.